male children in Bethlehem at Herod's command.
All right, that is slaughter of the innocents, and I guess you could even compare that what's happening. You know, children are being killed in Ukraine, and I mean that's the kind of thing you would compare this to. Slaughter or massacre. Moses, he's pretty big deal. What would you say about him? Like major summary of who he is. How would you describe Moses? Olivia.
Moses?
Yeah, like what does he represent? What yeah.
He's kind of just like a leader who led the Israelites and kind of guides them through the desert.
Yeah, and he they rejected him over and over, you know, and he was incredibly forgiving of them. He kept asking God, don't destroy him. I don't know what it was. He's so big. He covers so much territory. How about Nebuchadnezzar's dream? John, you know who that is?
I think he was the king that was dreaming about a statue, and the statue representing like the neighboring kingdom.
Yeah, it's a prophetic future of the future. Very good. We have two Noahs here. It seems like one of you ought to talk about Noah and the flood. So you want to do it? No. Like, of all the things you could say about that story, what is it that people always go to? Like authors could use. Is it symbolized by something?
It has the rainbow, which symbolizes God's promise and lighting the shore of the earth.
Very good. The covenant of the rainbow. Pharisees. Jonathan.
They were kind of like I guess they became like church leaders who persecuted Jesus.
And they were the ultra or super religious people. So that people, if you're compared to a Pharisee, that's not a good thing. You're super conservative, but you don't even know Jesus. You know, you're persecuting him, and yet you're the religious big shots. Philistines. I'm going to give you a definition here that's, I don't even know why it's connected to this word, but who were the Philistines? Caroline, could you tell us?
These were another people group, and they usually had conflicts with the Israelites.
Yeah, Goliath was a Philistine. I'm going to give you this definition. Again, it has, as far as I can tell, it has no connection. It's got to, because it's the same word. This is a Philistine. I want you to write it down. It's a good SAT word. A Philistine is a person who, I'll read it twice, the person who is smugly insensitive or indifferent to intellectual or artistic values. It's someone who is smugly insensitive or indifferent to intellectual or artistic value. What does smug mean? That's a good word. If someone is smug, what are they? You don't know what that means? They look down on, they feel like superior. They feel superior to you. They act smug, or they act like they're better than you. So Philistines are people. Listen to this, who think they denounce or look down on people who are artistic or literary. Isn't that odd? You know, you think it'd be the other way around. The literary artistic person would be looking down on the people that don't do those things, but this is the opposite. So they don't get it. They don't get the intellectual life, which is what we are here. We are promoting the intellectual, artistic as well, life. Pontius Pilate. Like, Claire, what does he represent?
Well, the main thing that we said was like he was the one that kind of called Barabbas out. Was ultimately the one that sent Jesus to death on the cross.
Yeah, you know, remember who's down in Dante's hell with Satan? Do you remember the three people that are with Satan? They're in his mouth. He's chewing on them in Dante. Judas is clearly one of them. Do you remember the other two? They killed Julius Caesar. Brutus, yeah, and Cassius. Remember, it's written by a Roman or an Italian. But as far as I don't remember Pontius Pilate being mentioned anywhere. Judas gets this worst place, you know, like the worst guy of all time is Judas. But Pontius Pilate should be up there somewhere, but he's usually not. Prodigal son. Will, prodigal son.
Parable that Jesus told, and do you want me to
Well, I think we all know this story, but how would you, what if I said that everybody in here, your family, probably there's a prodigal in your family somewhere? What am I mean?
You mean like it's someone who kind of made a turn in their life, I guess?
Which direction? At first.
Or at first in a bad way.
Right.
And then they start to come back.
So, yeah, that's how, I mean, I bet everybody has that person that kind of rejects the family, kind of goes rogue, and everybody else is doing this and he or she's doing that. But the idea would be, that maybe they would turn around. Rachel and Leah. Daniel.
I said that, like, weren't they, like, wasn't she someone that, like, said that, like, anybody who came through the door,
That's Jephthah. If we just did that in the 9th grade, so it's a fresh one. Rachel and Leah, the two girls. Did you know?
I forget who it was, but they were going to be married.
It was Jacob.
Okay, Jacob. And Jacob goes to their dad and says he wants to marry Rachel. And so the guy says, okay, work 7 years and then you can marry her. But surprise, it's Leah under the bride veil. And then he works 7 more years and gets Rachel. But Rachel's the favorite wife, so all her kids get the good stuff.
And it's actually Leah is the older and Rachel is the younger, but you usually hear it Rachel and Leah. Because he ended up marrying Rachel first, but he wanted Leah. There's more to that. I mean, he wanted Rachel, even though he was married. Jacob, you with me? Tell me about Ruth. Can you tell me about Ruth? Okay. How about it, Ty? Ruth.
Ruth?
Yeah, got a whole book about her.
Was she the one that hid those spies?
Who was that? Rahab.
Rahab.
No, it wasn't.
All I had was she trusted God.
Yeah, there's a whole book about her. Yeah, Claire.
Isn't she the one that married Boaz? And she was like a kind of poor, and then she like was subservient to him? And a good wife.
She was what?
Subservient.
Well, she married him, so
Right.
we don't use that terminology. But at first, she was willing to be, yeah.
Wasn't she a Judite?
She was. She was a Moabite. What were you going to say?
Did she take care of her like husband's mother, Naomi?
Her mother-in-law. Yeah, she refused to leave her. She becomes pretty important. She does marry Boaz, but what is, like, it's her offspring. Pretty important. 2 pretty important offspring. Jesus. And David. So everybody who is related to David is related to Ruth. And Ruth is a nobody. Ruth is a nobody. And yet look at how God blesses her with, oh yeah, you're going to be the great, 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 great of God. Like Mary. Wow, I don't deserve this, but Salome, this is a trick question. Salome. Anybody get that one? Nobody got that one. Yes.
Who's Herod's stepdaughter?
Right. Now, why would I say it's a trick question?
Her name's not actually mentioned.
Exactly. Did you hear that? Say it again.
Her name's not actually mentioned.
So I can't tell you why or how the name Salome is related to, but what does she do? She's a good dancer out here.
She asked her about his stepmother.
Because
Her mom wanted
Because what did she do? What did Salome do? Remember, she was a good dancer. It's kind of question. What's going? She was dancing for Herod, And he liked it so much, he said, I'll give you anything. And eventually ends up getting the head of John the Baptist. Sermon on the Mount. Layla?
It's when Jesus is teaching.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I was not reacting to what you were saying. I was looking at the clock. I was thinking, what? But please say that again.
And then anyone was like, welcome to come and listen.
Yeah, it is the great sermon that Jesus preached. Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah.
It's a sinful city that's destroyed by God, and it was inhabited by Lot and his wife.
Yeah, and you know, of course, Sodom and Gomorrah, particularly Sodom, I guess Gomorrah is known, you know, the homosexuality thing, but that's not the only thing. What was the other thing? I mean, that's what, remember, the men of the city go, and they want the angel to know the angel, and that meant sexually, and that's bad enough, but what was wrong with their request? I mean, besides that. What was wrong with that? Besides the obvious, I mean, there's something. They were strangers. They didn't know they were angels. But what was wrong with their request was because they were guests. And do you remember that we just said the last ring of Dante's Inferno was Satan and Judas and Cassius and Brutus, because they betrayed their Lord. You know what the next to last, like the next to worst thing you could ever do, according to Dante's Inferno? What's the next to worst thing you could ever do? Betray a guest, which is what these guys were doing. They were going to harm a guest. Why did they have this? You could remember what did Lot do? You can have my daughters. Like, is that better? Yeah. Oddly enough. Why was that better? What was so bad about betraying a guest in your home? Can you think of any logic behind that? I mean, that doesn't make sense to us. Like, I'm not going to give you my daughters for these strangers. He didn't know they were angels either, because they could have been angels. Remember, in Greek mythology, Zeus and Apollo went around this city dressed as beggars, and nobody paid attention to them. This old couple, and they invited him in, and he blessed them and destroyed the city. So betraying a guest is like the next to worst thing you could ever do. That's just, again, it almost doesn't make sense to us, but it's a tradition that goes cross culture. Solomon, you know, he is king, greatest king, wisest man. That's the key, the wisest man. Swords into plowshares. Peace, where weapons of war are turned into tools. 30 pieces of silver. Who knows that one? Like,
How much Judas betrayed Jesus for?
so how would you use that? Like, what would that? Like, how would an author perhaps use that? Yeah, any story about betrayal, and you're paying them to betray somebody, that would be the 30 pieces. Through a dark glass, I bet nobody in here knows that. Nobody knows it, right? 1 Corinthians 13, Paul said, now we see through it as through a glass darkly, but then we'll see face to face. So it means that's the nature of being alive right now. We can't understand things fully. It'll take Tower of Babel. I saw a commercial that made me think of this just yesterday. What's Tower of Babel about? Yes, sir.
It's after Noah and
Yes.
his sons, after they got off, they started creating society, and they were supposed to split up across the earth, but they built a big tower, so when we get heaven, they all stay together, and God made them speak different languages, and then they split up.
I don't know if I'm not. I think I'm fair to say that it's, in a way, that's the start of nations, because up to that it was a global. They were trying to create a global community, but God said, no, you're going to be nations, and you're all going to speak differently. somehow that was, and even a world order, like, what do they call that? World, there's a name for that. You know what I'm talking about? There's the new world order. Even in Revelation, the world comes together, but not in the way that it should, but to oppose God. Anyway, Babel. I saw a commercial for a company named Babel that teaches you how to speak a foreign language, and they spell it with two B's. That's a biblical allusion. I don't really know how much time we have left. How much time do we have? 10 minutes or 5? 10? All right, well, that's all the time you need. Yeah, you let her go first. Ladies first. I'm going to ask you to do something here in the last 10 minutes. You can go. Yeah, go ahead. All right, got 10 minutes. It's possible that you would have to compare 2 poems on the exam. All right, I'm going to ask you to.
I think I'll still do it.
I don't know what time. Anyway. Oh, yeah. You pass that back. Yeah.
I found my question.
All right, I'll be back there. Let me read this to you. You get 10 minutes. That's more time than you would have on the test. But notice they're both sonnets. You need one? Both sonnets, which I don't think you could write a whole paper on that. So they're going to, if you give you a short poem, they'll probably give you 2. They don't always do that. So I want you to read the 2. One's by Keats, one's by Longfellow. Read them and underline these things. Write an essay in which you compare and contrast. Circle, underline those. You got to do exactly what the prompt tells you. Underline it. Don't do this without underlining it. Analyzing the poetic technique. Circle that. Each writer uses to explore his particular situation. So you're going to show how these 2 poems are alike, how they're different, and particularly pointing out the techniques. Please begin. Label it, circle it. We'll talk about it next week. Yeah, it is 1:10. Who could that be? I wonder. Got 25 people in it. I don't even look. I don't need to look. got a couple of minutes, but make sure that you keep this with you. You know what we could do? We could actually write from this. I could give you an assignment one day next week to use this to write about.